All right, so hopefully by showing you some professional examples of this in practice for concept work that uses compositing for both landscapes and for creatures, I've convinced you there is a purpose to this kind of concept sketching beforehand. And I hope to avoid having projects that get finished without ever getting sketched and then students just doing a sketch after the fact because it's a requirement. Because you'll be able to improve your work and how it communicates through understanding how to conceive through your sketching to begin with. So based on my inspiration and based on just some of the reference, I'll need more reference probably, I am going to start my sketching process, right? So I found all of these images off of Pixabay. And if Pixabay is not working like it was this morning, which is unusual, you can also go to Pexels, P-E-X-E-L-S, for just the Pixabay content, because it's all Creative Commons open, off of a foreign server, and you can access it that way. Okay, looking at my reference images, which were inspired by my inspiration, now I'm going to open a new browser window, because I'm going to digitally sketch. You can just sketch on a piece of paper. And I'm going to open Photopea, just photopea.com. And I'm going to say New Project. And I'm just going to use very typical, let's do Instagram portrait dimensions. But I'm going to name it, this is just a sketch, my name, and then assignment 2, sketch, flying jaguar. Kind of blending Mexican mythology and Greek mythology. So, my inspiration and my reference, it's informed by both. To digitally sketch, I'm just going to use the brush tool. I'm going to use black. I'm going to put it on a new layer. And I'm going to use a hardness. Yeah, let's go ahead and use 100% hardness with a brush size of about, because I'm using a tablet, of about 50, and I'm going to make it pressure sensitive. And I can set that pressure sensitivity on the toolbar options right here. So that means as I draw, the harder I press, the thicker it will be. But because I'm just sketching, like with a pencil, I don't want it to be 100% opaque as I sketch. I want it to be about 60% opaque. And maybe I don't want it 100% hard, like an ink pen. Maybe I want it to be about 70% hard. So now it will feel a little bit more like a pencil. And that maybe I'll even take it down to about 40% opacity. And you can also play with flow. It's slightly different than opacity. But anyway, let's look at my biggest inspiration for this, which shows the silhouette really clearly, which is this flying jaguar Oaxacan wood sculpture. And based on that, I'm going to draw a little box. Pretend this is your sketchbook. So this is the spiral binding of your sketchbook. And this is the outside edge of your sketchbook page. Because many of you still want to fill the page. And it's much, much better to instead contain your thumbnail sketches, your concept sketches, to something much smaller. So, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to draw what I think is a box that will contain my Jaguar skeletal template, or skeletal stick figure. What do I start with? I start with the cranium. The head is the focal point of most creatures, right? And then the eyes are the focal point of the head. It is like the engine of a car. If you don't have a recognizable head, you don't have a creature that we understand at all, right? It could just be just a lump otherwise. So I'm going to start with the cranium. And the cranium, which we all have, vertebrates, is the bone fishbowl around your brain. So I draw a circle, right? All my sketches are going to utilize the basic shapes, which are circles, triangles, squares, ovals, which are just long circles, right? Rectangles, which are just long squares. And then I add a basic shape. But those 5 layered up together can create any two-dimensional shape you can imagine. That's our visual language. But I add a 6th basic shape, which I call a wedge, which is just a triangle with its head cut off. And that helps speed things up. Yes, I can make that out of 3 triangles, but it saves a lot of time to just be able to do wedges. Okay, so I've drawn a circle. What do I need to add to that circle to turn it into a head? All heads should always be drawn with at least 2 shapes, right, to give direction, because a circle doesn't have direction on its own. You need a jaw, you need a mandible. This is the difference between a crocodile and a horse and a bird and a snake. The cranium is the same. The mandible shape is different. A human's mandible drops below the cranium, right? A jaguar's mandible, like a bear, is a wedge shape in front of the cranium. What we call a maw, right? Or a muzzle. So I draw that shape, and now I immediately know the direction of my creature's head. Why do I need to know the head direction? Because the spine needs to come from it, right? Yeah, and it will help when I'm looking for reference. And sure enough, I found reference of a head looking off this way. It's looking to the side, but it's also looking forward. So how can I show that in my sketch? Through something called direction lines. So if you were going to take a chicken egg, like this, and you were to draw lines on it with a Sharpie, like that, and then you turn the egg, those lines would also turn, like that. Those are direction lines. Here the egg is facing us directly. Here it is turned a little bit this way. And how can you tell, even though it's the exact same outline? Because of those direction lines. So how can I turn this? Well, I'm going to draw a line that shows that the head, like an egg, is angled towards me, right? Just like this reference. And a little bit like that inspiration. I can even indicate where the eyes might go, like here and here, right? And then I can do that same thing for the muzzle or the mandible. So direction lines. That really matters because the next line I need to draw is the spine. And like the pipe cleaners that R.J. Palmer uses for his dragon designs, the spine is what everything else connects to. So the spine comes from the back of the cranium, and then it curves. It's very important that it curves. Sometimes really severely, sometimes really subtly. And the reason you do it with light pencil is so you can play with it. And in my case, it's going to curve past the rib cage, past the pelvis, into the tail. Now, the first decision you make is how long do you go on that spine, which is like the string of a necklace, before you get to the next big skeletal structure, which is the rib cage. How long do you want the neck? A giraffe has a very long neck, right? Snake has a very long neck. And a snake has a rib cage. But eventually you get to a rib cage. I want my jaguar to be pretty strong in the front half, kind of intimidating like a bear. So I have a pretty short neck in mind. So I'm going to start the rib cage here and make it pretty big, have it end about here. So what do I draw for the rib cage? A big barrel shape to kind of contain all of that. Like a lion. But I'm also combining this with a pangolin and a serpent. And wings. So what does that rib cage do? Just like we saw with the R.J. Palmer designs, it shows me where the collarbone is. The collarbone is the thing that connects your shoulders. And it floats right in front of and at the top of the rib cage. You can feel it on yourself. It's not part of the rib cage, but it's the thing that contains it. It's like a wireframe cage that the rib cage connects to. So that is my shoulder joints. And then if I have wings, I have to build a secondary set. This is why we don't see creatures like this in nature, where you have a separate collarbone on the back of the rib cage, or that wraps around all the way to the back. And basically, instead of shoulder blades, which help with back muscles, you have a new connection point for wings. And then those wings if they're birds' wings, they're structured like this. They're like an arm with really long fingers. Right? And so you have the upper arm, the lower arm, the hand, and then the fingers which connect to all the pin feathers, and everything kind of flows from there. Okay, next. What do I want for the arms? Do I want jaguar arms? I do not. I want pangolin arms. So jaguar arms would be pretty big and powerful, like this, like this, like this, right? Like a predatory cat. But pangolin arms are going to be a lot shorter, like this, like this, like that. So like this, like this, like that. That's the skeleton of them. And my reference for that is this pangolin right here. But they make up for their short little arms with really cool texture. So that's going to be my rib cage right there. But I'm going to have a very different head in my creature composite. And of course, different wings. And it looks like my wings, I need to make those collarbones, or the back kind of scapular ones, a little bit further behind. So I'll clean that up. And that's why we do it in pencil, so you can make those little adjustments. Because it's all about the silhouette, the shape it's making. Okay, next. What's the next ring on the spine? Like beads on a necklace. That's on the skeleton. It's on our skeleton too. The pelvis. The hips, yes. Pangolin has pretty wide pelvis, right? Because it spends a lot of its time on its back legs. And it's got a heavy tail. Jaguar has a pretty narrow pelvis. So what do I want to do? Well, I'm going to do probably somewhere in between, right? And then the hips connect to that. Now, I don't want to do pangolin feet or jaguar feet. I want to do chicken feet, which I haven't even found reference for yet, but I can. Chicken feet is pretty easy to find. So what do I do? Well, I'm going to use either pangolin or jaguar haunches and then chicken feet from about this point on. But they all will match with the same joints. And this is what you call a backwards bending knee. But most four-legged creatures, and even most bipedal creatures like kangaroos, do not have legs like we do. They have all the same anatomical structure, but I'll show you really quick on my little sketchbook here. Though it's getting a little in the weeds. This is what a human pelvis kind of looks like. And then this is what the femur looks like, the biggest bone in the human body. That is our upper leg bone. And it connects into the pelvis like that, into the ball sockets. And then we have our knee, and then we have a fibia and tibia, and then we have our ankle and our foot, right? So this is how we walk around. And how does our knee bend? Well, our knee bends like this, right? But that's because we've been walking on two legs for a long, long time. Most creatures have a pelvis that's similar, but their femur is much, much shorter. So their femur comes out like this because femurs are very heavy. And heavy isn't a good thing. And then their longest bone is usually their fibia and tibia in their legs. And then what is our ankle is what we think of as that animal's knee. And then you have the tarsals and metatarsals, which make up the arch of our foot, is what we think of as their lower leg. And then those animals stand on their toes, whether they're claws, talons, hooves. So this is what we call sometimes a backwards bending knee, right? And it's contained with muscle. The human leg, I've never explained this so thoroughly in this class, but the human leg, we have the glute muscles, right? And then we have the upper leg muscles, which wrap around the knee joint. And then we have the calves, and then they taper to the ankle. On an animal, you have those same muscles, but they're in different proportions. The glute muscles and then the upper leg muscles are incredibly short and powerful. It's what we call the haunch. And you can see the haunch right there. You can see the haunch right there. But sometimes that haunch is so big and powerful